Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Today, we're going to look at matter cycling within ecosystems. Remember, one of the factors I said sustains life is going to be the sunlight that drives a lot of these systems and gravity that also is going to be moving them. These nutrient cycles are powered by that. They're going to be taking nutrients, moving them through the different spheres, allowing organisms to grow and flourish. So they're extremely important because we're looking at the movement of nutrients. The water cycle, probably one of the more important ones. They're all important, but this one definitely a lot of people are familiar with. I think you learn about it pretty early on and it moves through. But starting with our sun right here, just taking a look, it's giving us the energy, basically to evaporate water from the ocean. It evaporates, condenses, and eventually we'll get rain clouds where it precipitates and falls on the land. Now at that point, it can infiltrate into the ground. That's that movement into the ground, percolation moving through, where we have our groundwater movement, which eventually can make its way back into oceans. Very basic part of the water cycle. There's a couple other things that happens. With rain, it might also run off into lakes and streams and rivers, make its way back. It could either run off from the surface. It could also get into the air from transpiration. So these are just all the different ways that water can get into the atmosphere. Pretty basic, so I'm not going to spend too much time on here. There are strong forces of attraction between molecules of water. It allows for cohesion and also adhesion too. Exists as a liquid over a wide temperature range, which makes it definitely very unique. Changes temperature slowly. It's got that high specific heat. It takes a large amount of water to evaporate. It can dissolve a number of compounds, and it expands when it freezes. So all these things really help us to get life the way it is on this planet. There's a number of things that we usually do to affect this. Withdrawing large amount of fresh water. We'll be spending a lot of time on this because this is extremely important to Long Island with Long Island's groundwater supplying our drinking water. Clearing vegetation, eroding soils. We'll be talking more about that. Polluting surfaces and underground water. Also very important to Long Island, and it also contributes to climate change. That water cycle, shifting rain patterns, all of this is definitely a part of that water cycle. The carbon cycle is extremely important because this is what we most closely associate with the greenhouse effect and climate change. CO2 being a greenhouse gas, but also a component of photosynthesis and respiration. You can see how it really starts to move around through the system. We have CO2 that's in the up in the atmosphere can get dissolved into ocean water. Now when it does this, it can make its way into marine food webs. At this point, so basically what that means is we have algae, then organisms eat the algae and maybe use some of that CO2 to even make shells. Whatever the case may be, they die and they become sediments. Now here is kind of a good thing that CO2 is locked up, and it's there for quite a long time until that possibly becomes a fossil fuel at some other point, which we see with a lot of ocean exploration for oil. Now we have oil, natural gas. We burn that fossil fuel, pumping that CO2 back up into the atmosphere. This is the problem. The CO2 in the atmosphere allows for more heating, whereas if we left it locked up, that CO2 wouldn't be there. But anyway, it gets back into the atmosphere, which allows still for some diffusion still to occur. So the ocean basically acts as that carbon sink and pulls it in. Not only that, photosynthesis in plants will also act as a carbon sink. Same thing though, the plants will eat it, but respiration will pump it back up into the atmosphere. Burning anything or deforestation will pump it back up into the atmosphere. It's all right. Decomposers will put it back in, but guess what? We have terrestrial varieties of fossil fuels. There it is, and it gets burned again. Terrestrial rocks. Right here, the weathering also, sedimentation. Remember, you can move those back into waterways and become marine sediment there. So there's a number of ways that carbon can move within these systems, and we're going to go more in detail into these in class. Just a basic overview. But like I said, altering that carbon or that CO2 by burning fossil fuels, clearing vegetation, will cause an increase in temperatures. We know this. This is what happens. Moving on to the nitrogen cycle. I'm going to keep it very simple here, and in class we're going to go way more into it. Probably one of the more difficult ones. We have gaseous nitrogen in the atmosphere as N2. And N2 is pretty happy being N2. It likes it. So the problem is how do we get that away? How do we break it up so that we can use it? We do that through nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation will basically take that N2, break it apart, combine it with other elements to make it more usable. So fertilizers basically do that also. They'll take that, and nitrogen fixation will also give us our ammonia or ammonium in soil. We have some loss to leaching. Remember, that's water basically taking that ammonia down through the soil into deeper layers where we can't use it. At that point, that ammonia undergoes nitrification, turning it into a useful compound. This is all done by microbes. And we'll talk more about these in class, where it becomes nitrite. Once again, more microbes will turn it into nitrate, where it's taken up by our lovely plants and then makes its way into food webs. Eventually they die. The plants die, or the animals die that ate them. They get decomposed, and now they undergo ammonification once again by microbes. So you can see here microbes play an extremely important part within our nitrogen cycle. But that's all right. Once it's ammonia, it could still undergo through a number of different bacteria, through nitrification, and make its way back in the plant. So there's a constant recycling here. We can get that nitrogen back up into the atmosphere. Once again, through microbes, our lovely bacteria, and through denitrification, that'll put nitrogen back up into the atmosphere. So that's just a pretty much natural cycle how it works. Now, there are things that we do to basically cause more nitrogen to go up in the atmosphere, and we'll talk about those in class. Adding gases that contribute to acid rain, like I said, more of these in class. Nitrous oxide, through different farming practices, will go into the air, contaminating groundwater from nitrate ions and inorganic fertilizers. Remember those fertilizers that ammonia can leach into groundwater supplies, and then releasing nitrogen into the troposphere through deforestation. We'll be going more in detail into these. This is just looking at fertilizer use over time. Then we have our phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus cycle is an interesting cycle because there is no atmosphere in this cycle, which means that phosphorus isn't really moving through the atmosphere as a gas phase like we see in the water cycle, the carbon cycle, nitrogen, or even the sulfur cycle will be going on. Okay, so we'll start with the phosphorus cycle here. We'll start with our little bird. Basically, this is going to happen. This little bird is going to produce guano, a phosphorus-rich waste, and it's going to pile up. And what ends up happening, so that's part of our marine food webs right here. And you can see the excretion, it piles up. We can use this as fertilizer, actually. And it can actually go over down through this way. But anyway, it can get dissolved in ocean water, and it could stay within here. So now the phosphorus is within this water or this marine food web. Notice that we do get some settling out. These marine sediments then, through lithification or other processes, we're going to get rocks containing this phosphorus, where at that time we can mine it out, which is shown over here, where we use it as a fertilizer, and that can make it into land-based food webs. We also see weathering of rocks, which will also get it into those land-based food webs. So really the only way it makes it from the marine to the land webs is from the marine sediments that compact over time with phosphorus in them and weather and make it to there that way, or through mining and then putting them into the soil. So really it kind of stays between the lithosphere and hydrosphere and doesn't move out of there. Okay, so we remove large amounts of phosphate from the earth through mining to make fertilizer. We reduce phosphorus in tropical soils by clearing forests and adding excess phosphate to aquatic systems from runoff of animal waste and fertilizers. We'll be talking a lot more about that. It causes a huge amount of problems. The same with the nitrogen cycle, actually, also. And the last one, our sulfur cycle. In our sulfur cycle here, where shall we start? We could start up. Let's start right here. So we have sulfur trioxide. Here we add a little water, we get sulfuric acid, and it basically becomes our acid rain, where it falls. Now this acid rain, some of the sulfur can be used. It's taken up by plants. Sulfur is a compound that's needed. The animals eat it, and what ends up happening to plants and animals eventually die, and they become decaying matter. When microbes work on this decaying matter, they release hydrogen sulfide. And once again, they're broken down, and we get what's called the sulfate salts, and it's going to kind of stay within the system. We also get the hydrogen sulfide released as a gas, goes up into our atmosphere, reacts with oxygen to get our sulfur dioxide, and basically we completed our cycle. Oceans, in certain algae, will release dimethyl sulfide into the atmosphere, and the same thing. It'll undergo a series of transformations before it re-enters this cycle and moves through again. You see volcanoes will also emit some, industry will also emit some hydrogen sulfide. So there's a number of natural ways that it gets into the atmosphere and it gets pulled down and through into our basically our terrestrial or even our aquatic food webs. So we add sulfur dioxide to the atmosphere by burning coal and oil. We see this usually as an impurity. We don't like coal and oil that have sulfur in it. It's something we try to remove beforehand, but it is there. Refining sulfur containing petroleum and converting sulfur containing metallic ores into free metals such as copper, lead, and zinc, and releasing sulfur dioxide into the environment. These are all through different mining methods. Now, along with all this, as our last thought before we get out of all these nutrient cycles, is that we have the Gaia hypothesis. Now, some people believe that the Earth, with all of these systems it has, is like a living, breathing entity. So a strong Gaia hypothesis, basically life controls the Earth's life-sustaining processes, meaning that Earth does what it does, and it maintains itself. A weak Gaia hypothesis says life influences the Earth's life-sustaining processes. So it's really kind of what we're doing, and life itself is kind of molding what's happening with Earth. So that Gaia hypothesis is really just saying the Earth is a living, breathing thing. So what ecologists do to learn about these systems is basically they observe it. They look at it, they're able to collect data through remote sensors, using geographic information systems, basically overlaying data on top of data on top of data to kind of get a feel for what's going on out there. And we also used indoor or outdoor chambers to study ecosystems and set up tests. And that's basically it. There's not much more to it. So between that, these number of different ways of collecting data and crunching it, we're able to see how these factors that sustain life really work and impact each other. That's it. I know it's a little rough, this one, with all different cycles, but we'll be going more into them in class. I hope you enjoyed this screencast. Take care.